Why do we ever argue? After all, if our logic is sound, then we should be able to show the other person our logic, and then there would be no room for disagreement. Of course, this isn't usually what actually happens. In this episode, I plan to explain one major insight from John Locke's essay concerning human understanding that will help you resolve future arguments. The insight, which may sound silly at first, is that many arguments stem from using unclear words. If we would just define our words carefully, the majority of disputes could be resolved. Locke writes that here I desire and may be considered and carefully examined whether the greatest part of the disputes in the world are not merely verbal and about the signification of words. At a fundamental level, words are just sounds we use to stand for ideas. Their purpose is to communicate what's in our mind to someone else. But if the word that we use does not trigger the same idea in the other person's mind, then even though we're using the same words, we're not talking about the same thing. Locke points out, to make words serviceable to the end of communication, it is necessary that they excite in the hearer exactly the same idea they stand for in the mind of the speaker. To best explain what Locke is saying here, I think it's helpful to look at a few examples. In each example, I'll provide two scenarios. In the first scenario, two people think they are arguing about an idea, but they are really using the same word to mean different things. In the second scenario, they pause, define the word, and the real disagreement becomes clear. For the first example, consider the word fair. Imagine two coworkers arguing about how a bonus was divided. One says, "That wasn't fair." The other replies, "What do you mean? That absolutely was fair. But we both worked the same hours." "Yeah, but my work was better." At this point, they think they're arguing about whether the bonus was allocated fairly. In reality, they're arguing about what the word fair means. Now watch what happens when they step back and define it. "When I say fair, I mean everyone should get the same," says the first. "When I say fair, I mean people should get what they earn." So we're not disagreeing about the numbers. We're disagreeing about the definition of fair. Once the word fair is defined, the argument becomes clear. They're debating which principle of fairness they adhere to. Once that becomes clear, real progress can be made in the discussion. In the second example, consider the word love. Imagine a couple having an argument. One person says, "You don't love me anymore." The other replies, "That's not true. I'm still here, aren't I? But you're always busy. We never spend time together. So now I don't love you because I have work?" The other responds. This argument is escalating quickly. Both people think they're arguing about their relationship, but they're actually just using the word love to mean two different things. One thinks love means feeling cared for through time and attention. The other thinks it means loyalty and staying committed. Now watch what happens when they slow down and define the word. When I say love, I mean feeling close and spending time together. When I say love, I mean staying loyal and not walking away. So we're not really accusing each other of the same thing, the first realizes. We're talking about different kinds of love. Once the word is clarified, the fight changes because the confusion clears and they can actually talk about what each of them needs to feel loved. Finally, consider an example using the word freedom. Imagine two people arguing about a law that requires employers to provide health insurance to their workers. A business owner says, "This law takes away our freedom." An employer replies, "No, it gives people more freedom. It forces businesses to buy something they don't want to. It gives workers security so they are not trapped by medical bills." They think they are arguing about the goodness of the law. In reality, they're using the word freedom to mean different things. One means freedom from government coercion. The other means freedom from economic vulnerability. Now watch what happens when they define it. When I say freedom, I mean being free from government mandates. When I say freedom, I mean having real security and the ability to live without constant fear. So we're not really disagreeing about the policy details, the verse realizes. We're disagreeing about what kind of freedom matters more. Once the word is clarified, the argument becomes a real philosophical discussion about freedom instead of a confused verbal fight. By showing these three examples, my hope is that you can see what Locke means when he says that the greater part of disputes are about the definition of words. When we stop and define what we actually mean by the words we're using, many disputes either disappear completely or at the very least reveal the real disagreement underneath. The takeaway is that this can lead to much healthier relationships and conflict resolution. Thanks so much for watching. The goal of each episode on this channel is to share one takeaway from a great philosophical work that's helpful for life today. If that's something you're interested in, then subscribe to follow along, and I hope to see you in the next episode.